In the last presentation or lecture, we looked at various methods of preventing crime. But we also acknowledge that those methods are not 100% effective, which means, therefore, that sometimes crimes do occur. And therefore, when they occur, they have to be punished, or certain actions must be taken against the offenders and other perpetrators of crime. So today we want to look at some of the methods or mechanisms that have been developed over the years to punish crime and specifically punish the offenders or perpetrators of crime. So today I want to invite the listeners to a candid discussion on methods of punishing crime. We want to start by asking ourselves what crime is, because before you punish or take action against something, it is important to know what the thing itself is. So crime can be understood in different ways. There is the way lawyers and the state understand it. There is a way on how society understands it. And there is a way on how it's understood generally across different cultures. Otherwise, we do not have a standard global definition of what a crime is. So we want to understand crime from the legal and political perspective to mean any act which is prohibited by authorities and which is punishable by law. So in terms of legal and political understanding, we understand crime as any act which is banned or prohibited by authorities. And it is not merely banned, it is also punishable by law. In other words, there are relevant laws that have been enacted to punish it. Sociologically, however, we understand crime as action that cause harm and violate social norms. So anything that is harmful or something that goes against our norm, we call it crime. The harm here could be physical harm, could be psychological harm, or it could be social harm. But above all, the harm must be that which is against the normative practices of a given society. Therefore implies here that crime is socially constructed, and what one society considers criminal might not constitute a crime in another culture. But as long as a given culture considers certain actions as harmful and in violation of their norms or cultural values, then at that instant, that act becomes a crime. But crime is also generally understood as the intentional commission of an act which is usually deemed socially harmful or dangerous, and which is specifically defined, prohibited, and punishable under criminal law. So this definition combines both the social, the legal, and the political aspects, so that it understands crime from the legal, the political, and the social perspectives. Now, not every act that any human being or any person might commit or fail to commit is considered criminal. And therefore, an act becomes criminal if it meets certain standards. One, the act is voluntary. In other words, the person committed it in a voluntary manner. The person was not forced. For instance, if you are forced to kill somebody and you didn't act freely, even though you have murdered, but that action may not sufficiently be proved to mean criminal if it was not voluntarily done. Again, an act is considered criminal if it is committed by an individual with a very clear state of mind. In other words, a mentally retarded person committing an act, such an act may not be considered criminal. Again, an act is considered criminal if there is connection between the intention and the criminal act itself. For example, if I wanted to throw a stone to hit a bird, but by bad luck, that stone hits a human being, and in the process, the person dies because of the damage or the injury caused by the stone, that might not be called criminal because the original intention was not to hit the stone, rather to hit the human being, but to hit the bird. And therefore, the criminal intent aspect of it might be lacking. Again, an act is considered criminal if it is prohibited or forbidden by existing laws. So that if we do not have laws that prohibit something, then it becomes quite difficult for such an act to constitute crime. Prohibition here might not just mean the written law. Even our norms, our values also constitute regulations that govern human conduct. And therefore, if our norms, our values prohibit or forbid certain actions, then such actions will still constitute a crime. Then lastly, an act is considered criminal if it is punishable by the state. In other words, there are specific laws that can be cited and spells out how a given act is punishable. In that case, therefore, an act which is punishable by law or by the state, meaning that there is existing law that prohibits it, then such act would constitute a criminal act. What then are the various methods or types of punishing crime? The first one, not in their order, is what we call retribution. Retribution is a type of punishment which is grounded on the belief that punishment holds, which is based on the fact that punishment is a moral requirement that the guilty make amends for harm they have caused to society. It means, therefore, that in retribution, a person is punished because he deserves to be punished. In other words, if a person commits a wrong, then the opposite action of that wrong is punishing that particular person. And therefore, it seeks to cause certain form of suffering to the wrongdoer, which is considered equal to the suffering they caused with their actions. And this approach to punishment is based on the following three principles. One, proportionality, that is, the crime committed must be equal to the punishment meted on the wrongdoer. The other principle that underpins retribution is legitimate punishment. In other words, the kind of punishment meted on the individual wrongdoer must be that which is accepted as the right punishment. For instance, if somebody kills an individual and then the person is given a fine of very small amount of money, then the question is, what do our laws say regarding a given type of punishment? Is the kind of punishment meted on that person the one that is prescribed in law? If not, then there will be an element of illegitimacy, so that punishment that is given out must be that which is provided for in the regulations. And the third one is that before punishment, there must be sufficient proof beyond reasonable doubt that the act for which a person is being accused of is actually the one that the person committed. So that a case in which a person is unfairly punished or is punished for acts that he or she did not commit do not arise. There are several ways on how retribution as a form of punishment is applied. Some of them include fines. For example, if there was fraud, an individual is found to have embezzled certain funds, he can be asked to refund the amount in addition to certain fines and penalties. Then long-term imprisonment for offenses that are violent in nature. This type or approach to punishment has certain limitations, or what we call certain criticisms. One of the most outstanding criticism that has been advanced against retribution as a form of punishment is the fact that it ignores the underlying causes of crimes. It's assumed that crime do not occur in a vacuum. There are certain factors that trigger their occurrence, and therefore it is important that such factors are focused on. So this theory, retribution, is accused for focusing only on punishing the offenders and neglecting what probably could have led offenders to commit certain crimes. Factors such as poverty, lack of opportunity, mental health issues, among others, is ignored, and it is felt that this is unfair because it is important to look at what leads individuals to commission of crime. The other one is the aspect of disproportionate punishment. In other words, there is a mismatch between the offense committed and the punishment meted against the offender. The retribution approach to crime punishment has also been criticized for focusing more on the vulnerable. We know that in society we have people who are vulnerable, and therefore their vulnerability predisposes them to crime. And therefore it is the opinion of critics that retribution can unfairly target individuals who may not have the resources or power to defend themselves. Indeed, this has been seen quite often where prominent people with money and resources hire lawyers, very powerful lawyers, and in the process they present strong and credible arguments which tilts judicial rulings in their favor. Now, the same might not work with vulnerable groups. For instance, even ability to source for adequate rebuttal evidence can be quite a huge task. Resources that are lacking to hire lawyers and to make sufficient presentation in court, again, might be lacking. And therefore, because of that, it is possible that between the haves and the have-nots, those that are likely to be punished for commission of crime are likely to be those who are vulnerable because of their inability to circumvent hurdles within the law enforcement and justice system. The last criticism that has been leveled against retribution is too much focus on the suffering. In other words, it focuses more on the punishment rather than on the well-being of the victim. Because the focus here, you want to punish the offender. But what is it that is being done to the victim or the community where crime has occurred? Nothing completely goes there. So the focus is more on the offender. Fine, it is good to punish the offender, but what is it that is being done to restore the victims to his or her status before a crime was committed against him or her? That aspect is completely ignored and lacking, and retribution as a method of crime management has been severely criticized for neglecting that. The other approach or type is what we call incapacitation. Now, incapacitation focuses more on preventing future crimes by disabling and restricting the offender's ability to commit a future wrong. And this is largely achieved through actions such as death penalty, long-term imprisonment, house arrest, and even disqualification from professional practice. For instance, a person who has committed murder in some jurisdictions is committed to death penalty. And the assumption, therefore, is that by eliminating him from society through death penalty, then there is no possibility of him or her committing crime in future. Or through long-term incarceration, it's also believed that the time the person spends in prison bars him or her from mingling with the public and in the process committing crime. Issues such as house arrest, because the person is restricted within the household or within the compound, it becomes difficult for that person to commit crime. Disqualification from professional practice, for instance, doctors. If a doctor committed crime, say such as rape, incapacitation as a form of crime punishment might be meted on him on the assumption that when his professional license and practice is withdrawn, and therefore he has no ability to practice, chances of him meeting female patients and the process committing a crime of rape, which he has been accused of before, are minimized. So when you talk of incapacitation, we are basically concerned about what societies can do to render the criminal completely incapable of committing crime in future. Now, this form of crime punishment focuses more on offenders whom society and the justice system consider as extremely dangerous, such as those who have been found guilty of murder, rape, and other forms of violent crimes. It is felt that allowing them to continue being part and parcel of society gives them opportunity to continue committing crime. And therefore, the best way is to completely eliminate them from society. And through that elimination, it renders it completely impossible for them to commit crime in future. Again, critics have also noted that incapacitation as a form of crime punishment also has its certain limitations. For example, critics observe that incapacitation is focusing on punishing crimes that are yet to occur, because the goal is to make it difficult for an individual to commit crime in future. Suggests that you are punishing an individual for a crime that he or she is yet to commit. So that becomes an important weakness that critics have pointed out about incapacitation as a form of punishing a crime. Again, it is said that it's ineffective, and this is based on the fact that it may not be effective in reducing crime rates, because incarceration individuals would not have to reoffend had they not been incarcerated. In other words, the fact that a person is meted with the death sentence, the fact that a person is given a long-term criminal imprisonment, the issue is, even if you prevent that person through such forms of punishment from committing crime, you are not addressing crime in the general society, and therefore eliminating one individual amidst the presence of thousands, if not millions, of criminals outside is not an effort that might yield much when it comes to reduction of general crime in society. So that way, it's not effective in terms of addressing general crimes in society. Indeed, we have seen quite a lot of instances where people still kill despite the knowledge of the fact that some of their colleagues that were accused and were charged and found guilty of murder are incarcerated. So that the fact that somebody is incarcerated or has been incapacitated does not prevent others from committing crime. The other issue that has been cited as a possible weakness to this is incapacitation might lead to overcrowding, because you need to take these people to prison. And when you consider imprisonment, and especially long-term imprisonment as the only avenue of making individuals incapable of committing crime, then this one might mean that now quite a lot of people will find themselves in prison. Then there are also issues of ethics. For instance, punishments such as death penalty have been outlawed in so many jurisdictions. I think even in Kenya, although it still remains, but it is, I think for several decades, no individual who has been found and recommended for the death penalty has ever been committed to death. That largely because of continued cases of concerns about the impact of death penalty on human rights and freedoms. So people look at it that incapacitation has ethical concerns, and because of that, it is not the appropriate method to administer as a means of punishing crime. The other approach is what we call deterrence. Deterrence is yet another important approach that has been employed across many cultures and across many jurisdictions. By deterrence, we mean an act of preventing a particular act or behavior from happening, and this approach to punishment is justified on the basis of preventing, again, future crimes. Now, distinction is normally made or drawn between two types of deterrence, what we call specific and general deterrence. Specific deterrence refers to the aim of imposing punishment to deter individuals who have already offended from reoffending. In other words, when we talk of specific deterrence, we mean a punishment that is meted on a person that has already committed crime. And in doing so, the aim is to prevent this person from committing crime again. So that when a punishment is meant to provide specific deterrence, the age and the criminal history of an individual are factors that are considered by the justice system. Individuals that are still young may not be committed to serious deterrence as a form of punishment. Again, criminal history, if you have so many a bad history of committing crime, again, there's a possibility that that particular person might be committed to jail for a long time. Specific deterrence can take several forms, including fines, prison time, and many other sentences, depending on the offender and the crime that has been committed. Then we have what we call general deterrence, is one that focuses on the general society, potential offenders. The person has not committed offense, but they are meant to learn something from the punishment that has been meted on the offender, so that it can prevent them from engaging in criminal activities based on what they have observed is the punishment that is meted on the offenders. This method of punishment too has its shortcomings. One of the criticisms that have been leveled against deterrence approach to punishment is too much focus on punishment. In other words, there's a greater emphasis on punishment, and this may lead to authorities not taking due care of the factors that contribute to crime. While crime has to be punished, but concurrent effort is also necessary to ensure that factors that predispose individuals to crime are also addressed. Because even if you punish individuals and still there is fertile ground for commission of crime, then such individuals would still continue to commit crime. We have indeed seen quite a number of cases where individuals commit crime, they are taken through justice system, and they are jailed. They serve their term, and upon release, on the completion of their term, they again commit crime as soon as they join society. The reason why they do so is conditions that facilitate criminal conduct has not been addressed, and therefore, however much heavy punishment authorities impose on individuals for committing crime, it will not in any way deter those that are subjected to conditions that predispose them to crime from committing crime. So that is an accusation that is leveled against this. Again, it is felt that critics also feel that deterrence can actually lead to increase in problems. That is, harsh punishments, for instance, like long prison sentence, may lead to a cycle of violence and retaliation, potentially increasing crime rates rather than reducing them. For instance, if people are punished through long-term imprisonment, the associates and relatives who feel that the punishment that has been offered is not commensurate with the offense committed can actually feel dissatisfied, and that disaffection can cause problems in society in terms of commission of certain crimes. Deterrence has also been accused for oversimplifying criminal behavior. In other words, it is criticized for failing to account for the complex factors that contribute to criminal behaviors, such as poverty, social inequality, and mental health issues. I think I have inadvertently also explained this when I was looking at the previous criticism. Again, it ignores underlying issues, right? There are several issues in society that also cause crime. These issues need to be addressed, even as individuals who fail to live within the normative concerns of society or within the legal and constitutional requirements of good behavior. Even as they are being punished, it is important that also other things are also done to ensure that the environment is conducive and therefore people do not commit crime because of adverse factors that exist in society. The other approach to crime punishment is what we call rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is another area, and rehabilitation can be understood as the process of re-educating those who have committed crime and preparing them to re-enter society. The goal of rehabilitation is to address the underlying root causes of crime in order to decrease the rate of recidivism once inmates are released from prison. Because we don't want a reoccurrence, reoffending. So the purpose is to rehabilitate individuals that have been found to be committing crime previously. The purpose is therefore to address and reduce the risk and needs of individual offenders through intervention programs so that they can return to society as law-abiding citizens. And this may involve education, vocational programs, counseling, and other intervention programs or skills training. Individuals need to be rehabilitated so that they're prepared to be meaningful and functional members of society. This theory also has its share of weaknesses, which critics have pointed out. One of them is that it lacks empirical evidence, and therefore rehabilitation programs lack a strong foundation in empirical knowledge about the cause of crime, and that the techniques used haven't been proven to reduce recidivism. In other words, if you say counseling, there is no guarantee that a person who has been rehabilitated through counseling will not commit crime again in future. Again, it is quite difficult to measure the success of rehabilitation as an approach to crime punishment. That is, determining whether someone has been successfully rehabilitated is challenging, and there are substantial difficulties for correction staff in assessing whether a person has made sufficient changes. We have seen cases, for instance, where individuals have been assessed and recommended for presidential pardon. Then upon being pardoned, the same individuals commit crime as soon as they join society. That means, therefore, the assessment that was carried out and which projected the individual to now having been rehabilitated might not in such circumstance be accurate. Again, there is focus on treatment rather than punishment. In fact, some people even wonder whether this is really a punishment. Because if a crime is committed, it is important that such individuals are punished. So there are concerns whether is this a punishment or a mere treatment. Then focus on individual behavior. There again, rehabilitation again looks more on the individual behavior rather than societal structures and how they potentially breed crime and breed criminals. Reparation too has its share of criticisms from scholars and practitioners of criminology. And some argue that reparations, particularly financial ones, can be perceived as a form of punishment for the offender rather than a genuine effort to restore the victim. Because it can encourage people. You commit crime, and because you have the resources to pay for the crime committed, you easily pay. So such kind of effort are assumed as not being adequate in terms of addressing or in terms of deterring individuals from committing crime. It can also create dependency and resentment because individuals who have been offended, knowing very well that the offender has money or has financial resources, might constantly be seeking for services from that particular individual. And in the process, it might not be seen in actual sense as a means of punishing the offender, because the offender suffers only the financial pain. There is no emotional, there is no physical, and there is no other forms of pain that the offender goes through. And therefore, those with money can easily commit crime because they can afford reparation. And that one now can lead to recidivism among the offenders. I want us to stop there, and I want to encourage all of us to take notes of any issue that we want to have further discussion on. Thank you so much for listening to me.